Welcome back. Section 2, Sutra 32. Śauca, Santoṣa, Tapas, Svādhyāya, Īśvara, Praṇidhāna, Niyama. Purity, cleanliness, contentment, austerity, self-study, study which leads to knowledge of the self, and self-surrender, resignation to God, fixed observances. Purity, contentment, austerity, self-study, and self-surrender constitute observances. We now come to Niyama, the second anga of yogic discipline, which serves to lay the foundation of the yogic life. Before we deal with the 5 elements of niyama enumerated in this sutra, it is necessary to consider the distinction between yama and niyama. Superficially examined, yama and niyama both seem to have a common purpose, the transmutation of the lower nature so that it may serve properly as a vehicle of the yogic life. But a closer study of the elements included under the 2 heads will reveal at once the difference in the general nature of the practices enjoined for bringing about the necessary changes in the character of the sadhaka. The practices included in yama are, in a general way, moral and prohibitive, while those in niyama are disciplinal and constructive. The former aim at laying the ethical foundation of the yogic life, and the latter at organizing the life of the sadhaka for the highly strenuous yogic discipline which is to follow. This difference in the general purpose of yama and niyama involves a corresponding difference in the nature of the practices themselves. In the observance of the great vow connected with yama, the sadhaka is not required to do anything. Day after day, he's required to react to the incidents and events in his life in a well-defined manner. But the number and character of the occasions which will arise in his life requiring the exercise of the 5 virtues will naturally depend upon his circumstances. If, for example, he goes and lives alone in a jungle as an ascetic, there will hardly arise any occasion for putting the virtues into practice. The great vow will be binding on him always, but if we may say so, will remain inoperative for want of opportunities for its practice. Not so in the case of niyama, which involves practices which have to be gone through regularly, day after day, whatever the circumstances in which the sadhaka is placed. Even if he's living alone, completely isolated from all social relationships, the necessity for going through these practices will remain as great as when he was living in the busy haunts of men. The busy haunts of men. Śauca, the first element of niyama, is Śauca, or purity. Before we can understand how the problem of purifying our nature is to be tackled, we should clarify our ideas with regard to purity. What is purity? According to the yogic philosophy, the whole of the universe, seen or unseen, is a manifestation of the divine life and pervaded by the divine consciousness. To the enlightened sage or saint who has had the divine vision, everything from an atom to the Īśvara of a Brahmanda is a vehicle of the divine life and therefore pure and sacred. From this higher point of view, nothing can therefore be considered impure in the absolute sense. So when we use the words pure and impure in relation to our life, we obviously use them in a relative sense. The word purity is used in relation to our vehicles, not only the body, which we can cognize with our physical senses, but also the superphysical vehicles, which serve as the instruments of emotion, thought, and other spiritual faculties. A thing is pure in relation to a vehicle if it enables or helps the vehicle to serve efficiently as an instrument of the divine life expressing through it at the particular stage of evolution. Let's read that again, because that's interesting. A thing is pure in relation to a vehicle if it enables or helps the vehicle to serve efficiently as an instrument of the divine life expressing through it at the particular stage of evolution. It is impure if it hinders the full expression of that life or offers impediments in the exercise of the vehicle's function. Now, how you interpret that is going to be very interesting, huh? Purity is therefore nothing absolute, only functional and related to the next stage of evolution, which life is seeking to attain. I love that. Life is always seeking to attain evolution. Isn't that wonderful? Purification therefore means elimination from the vehicles belonging to an individual of all those elements and conditions which prevent them from exercising their proper functions and attaining the goal in view. For the yogi, this goal is self-realization through the merging of his individual consciousness with the consciousness of the Supreme, or the attainment of Kaivalya in terms of the Yoga Sūtra. Purification for the yogi therefore means specifically the maintenance and transformation of the vehicle in such a manner that they can serve increasingly to bring about this unification. Purity, though it is functional, depends to a great extent upon the quality of the material of which a particular vehicle or consciousness is composed. The functional efficiency of the vehicle depends not only upon its structural organization, but also upon the nature of the material incorporated in it. The expression of consciousness through a vehicle may be compared to the production of different kinds of sounds by a piece of stretched metallic wire. We know that the sound which is produced depends upon three factors: the nature of the metal, the structure, diameter, and length of the wire, and the tension to which it is subjected. In the same way, the capacity of a vehicle to respond to different states of consciousness depends upon its material, its structural complexity, which increases as a result of evolution, and its sensitiveness. The reason why the material of the vehicle determines to a certain extent its vibrational capacity lies in the fact that quality of material and vibrational capacity are indissolubly linked in nature, each kind of material responding to a limited range of vibrations. So if we want to bring down into the lower vehicles the high and subtle vibrations corresponding to the deeper layers of human consciousness, we must provide in them the right and corresponding type of material. And we're always shifting the material as we're going through the practices, right? The practices actually change the makeup of your different vehicles. Right? All the lower vehicles of a jivatma are constantly changing, and purification consists in gradually and systematically replacing the comparatively coarse material of the bodies by a more refined type of material. We're becoming subtler and subtler. In the case of the physical body, purification is a comparatively simple matter and may be brought about by supplying to the body the right kind of material in the form of food and drink. According to the Hindu system of yogic culture, foods and drinks are divided into three classes. Can you guess what they are? Tamasic, Rajasic, and Sattvic. The gunas. And only those which are considered sattvic are allowed to the yogi who is building a pure and refined physical vehicle. Meat, alcohol, and so many other accessories of a modern diet make the physical body utterly useless for the yogic life. And if the aspirant has been coarsening the body through the use of these, he will have to go through a prolonged period of careful dieting to get rid of the undesirable material and make the body sufficiently refined. The purification of the subtler vehicles, which serve as instruments for the expression of thought and emotions, is brought about by a different and more difficult process. In their case, the vibrational tendencies are gradually changed by excluding all undesirable thoughts and emotions from the mind and replacing these constantly and persistently by thoughts and emotions of a higher and subtler nature. As the vibrational tendencies of these bodies change, the matter of the bodies also changes, paripasu, and after some time, if the effort is continued long enough, the vehicles are adequately purified. The test of real purification is provided by the normal vibrational tendencies which one finds in the vehicle. A pure mind easily and naturally thinks pure thoughts and feels pure emotions, and it becomes difficult for it to entertain undesirable thoughts and emotions in the same way as it is difficult for an impure mind to entertain high and noble thoughts and emotions. Another device recommended in the Hindu system of spiritual culture for the purification of the subtler vehicles is the constant use of mantras and prayers. These make the vehicles vibrate frequently at a very high rate of frequency, bringing about an influx of spiritual forces from the planes above, and the agitation thus set in motion day after day gradually washes out, as it were, all the undesirable elements from the different vehicles. It will be seen, therefore, that purification, or Śauca, is a positive practice. It does not take place of itself. One has to go through purificatory exercises day after day for long periods of time. That is why it has been included in Niyama. So I have a story coming up. So I was driving through the city the other day, and I was driving in Center City on the city streets. And it was late at night, so there wasn't a whole lot of people out, but I was just kind of like moseying along, driving. And I was feeling a lot of love and sweetness and a lot of gentle thoughts. And then I decided to get on the highway to zoom up to my neighborhood rather than continue driving through the city. And once I got on the highway, all of a sudden my thoughts changed. And I caught myself. I was just like, whoa, like the quality of my thoughts shifted pretty much as soon as I got on the highway. It was like there was a different frequency on the street than there was on the highway. And I noticed that it affected the quality of my thoughts, which was really interesting. The more disciplined you become and the more able you are to watch your mind, it's really fascinating to see how it shifts and how things affect it. Okay, Santoṣa. The second element of Niyama is Santoṣa, which is generally translated as contentment. It is necessary for the aspirant for the yogic life to cultivate contentment of the highest order, because without it, there is no possibility of keeping the mind in a condition of equilibrium. The ordinary man living in the world is subjected all day long to all kinds of impacts, and he reacts to these impacts according to his habits, prejudices, training, or mood of the moment, according to his nature, as we say. These reactions involve, in most cases, greater or lesser disturbances of the mind, there being hardly any reaction which is not accompanied by a ruffling of the feeling or the mind. The disturbance from one impact has hardly had time to subside before another impact throws it out of equilibrium again. The mind seems to be apparently calm sometimes, but this calmness is only superficial. Beneath the surface, there is an undercurrent of disturbance, like the swell in a superficially calm sea. This condition of mind, which need not necessarily be unpleasant, and which is taken as natural by most people, is not at all conducive to one-pointedness, and as long as it lasts, must result in vikshepa, the strong tendency of the mind to be outward turned, right? Remember vikshepa? So the sadhaka has to change this state of constant disturbance into a state of constant equilibrium and stillness by a deliberate exercise of the will, meditation, and other means that may be available. He aims at attaining a condition in which he remains perfectly calm and serene, whatever may happen in the outer world or even in the inner world of his mind. His aim is not merely to acquire the power to quell a mental disturbance if and when it arises, but the more rare power to prevent any disturbance from taking place at all. He knows that once a disturbance has been allowed to occur, it takes far more energy to overcome it completely, and even though outwardly it may disappear quickly, the inner subconscious disturbance persists for a long time. This kind of equanimity can be built only on the foundations of perfect contentment, the capacity to remain satisfied, whatever may happen to the sadhaka. It is an extremely positive and dynamic condition of the mind, which has nothing in common with that negative mentality which is based on laziness and lack of initiative, and which is rightly held in profound contempt by people in the world. It is based on perfect indifference to all those personal enjoyments, comforts, and other considerations which sway mankind. Its object is the attainment of that peace which takes one completely beyond the realm of illusion and misery. The cultivation of this supreme contentment and consequent tranquility of the mind is the result of prolonged self-discipline and going through many experiences which involve pain and suffering. It cannot be acquired by a mere assertion of the will once for all. Habits stronger than nature and habits developed through innumerable lives cannot be changed all at once. That is why constant alertness and training of the mind in maintaining the right attitude is necessary, and that is also why this virtue is placed under niyama. Tapas and the next two elements of niyama have already been referred to in section 2, Sutra 1, and the reason why they together are called Kriya Yoga has been given in dealing with that sutra. Now let's revisit that sutra. Section 2, Sutra 1. Tapa, Svādhyāya, Īśvara, Praṇidhāna, Kriya Yoga. Austerity, self-study, and resignation to Īśvara constitute preliminary yoga. Tapas is a very comprehensive term and has really no exact English equivalent. It combines in itself the significations of a number of English words: purification, self-discipline, austerity. The word stands for a class of various practices, the object of which is to purify and discipline the lower nature and to bring the vehicles of the Jivatma under the control of an iron will. The meaning of the word is probably derived from the process of subjecting alloyed gold to strong heating, whereby all the dross is burnt off and pure gold is left behind. In a way, the whole science of character building, whereby we purify and bring under control our lower vehicles, may be considered as a practice of tapas, but in the orthodox sense, the word tapas is used particularly for some specific exercises adopted for the purification and control of the physical body and the development of willpower. These include such practices as fasting, observing vows of various kinds, pranayama, etc. Some misguided people take the most extraordinary vows in practicing tapas, such as holding up the hand and keeping it in that position for a number of years, even though it withers. But such foolish practices are considered highly reprehensible in the enlightened school of yoga and are called asuric, demonical. Asuras. Did anyone read the Mahabharata, the Asuras? They're demons. The systematic practice of tapas generally begins with simple and easy exercises which require the exertion of willpower and is continued by progressive stages with more difficult exercises, the object of which is to bring about the dissociation of the vehicle from consciousness. In the case of the ordinary man, the consciousness is to a great extent identified with the vehicle through which it works. The practice of tapas generally loosens up this association, enables the consciousness to be partially separated from the vehicle, and this progressive awareness of the vehicle as part of the not-self means attenuation of asmita, or I am this consciousness. It is only when this power to dissociate consciousness from the vehicles has been acquired to some extent that the sadhaka can effectively purify and control the vehicles and use them for the purpose of yoga. Svādhyāya, the word Svādhyāya, is sometimes used in a limited sense for the study of the sacred scriptures. But this is only a part of the work which has to be done, the first step. The student has naturally first to make himself thoroughly familiar with all the essential literature bearing on the different aspects of yoga, just as he does in the study of any science. In this way, he acquires the necessary knowledge of the theoretical principles and practices which are involved in the pursuit of the yogic ideal. He also gets an idea of the relative values of the different methods and a correct perspective with regard to all matters connected with yogic practices. While this study is only theoretical and does not take him very far on the road to self-realization, it is nonetheless of great value to the student. Many people who set out on this quest have a very vague and confused intellectual background and lack that clear and broad grasp of the subject, which is so necessary for steady progress. But insufficiently equipped with the necessary knowledge concerning the various problems which are involved, they are apt to oversimplify these problems and to expect impossible results. Sooner or later, they become disheartened and frustrated or fall a prey to those unscrupulous people who pose as great yogis and promise all kinds of fantastic things to entice people into their fold. A broad and general intellectual background is necessary for achieving success in any sphere of scientific endeavor, and since yoga is a science par excellence, it is true of this science as well. But though a thorough and detailed study of yogic literature is a necessary part of Svādhyāya, it is only the first step. The next is constant brooding and reflection over the deeper problems which have been studied in their intellectual aspect through books, etc. This constant reflection prepares the mind for the reception of real knowledge from within. It produces a sort of suctorial action and draws the breath of intuition into the mind. The student thus begins to get a deeper insight into the problems of yogic life. The clearer the insight into these problems, the keener becomes the desire for the real solution, or gaining that transcendent knowledge in the light of which all doubts are completely resolved and the peace of the eternal is attained. This brooding and reflection on the great and fundamental truths of life gradually and imperceptibly begins to take the form of meditation in the ordinary sense of the term. That is, the mind becomes increasingly engrossed in the object of the search. This object need not necessarily be an abstract truth of a philosophical nature. It may be an object of devotion with whom the sadhaka wants to consume and be united. Oh, consume. I must be hungry. Commune. It may be an object of devotion with whom the sadhaka wants to commune and become united. The nature of the object will differ according to the temperament of the individual, but the condition of the mind, a state of deep absorption and intense desire to know, will be the same, more or less. In bringing about this one-pointed state of absorption, the use of mantras is very helpful. The sadhaka may use the mantra of his Ishtadeva, or any of the well-known mantras like Gayatri or Pranava. These mantras, as has been shown already, harmonize the lower vehicles of consciousness, make them sensitive to the subtler vibrations, and ultimately bring about a partial fusion of the lower and higher consciousness. So it will be seen that though Svādhyāya begins with intellectual study, it must be carried through the progressive stages of reflection, meditation, tapas, etc., to the point where the sadhaka is able to gain all knowledge or devotion from within by his own efforts. That is the significance of the prefix sva in Svādhyāya. He leaves all external aids, such as books, discourses, etc., and dives into his own mind for everything he needs in his quest. Īśvara Praṇidhāna. This is usually translated as resignation to Īśvara or God, but in view of the fact that the advanced practice of Īśvara Praṇidhāna is able to bring about samadhi, it is obvious that the word is used in a far deeper sense than the superficial mental effort of the ordinary religious man to resign himself to the will of God. When such a man makes a mental assertion of this kind, what he really means is that the will of God is supreme in the world over which he rules, and he submits to that will gladly, although the experience which has evoked that assertion may not be a pleasant one. This attitude is not unlike the attitude of a loyal subject to the fiat of his king. It is clear, however, that though this attitude of the pious individual is superior to the common attitude of resentment toward the inevitable calamities and sufferings of life, and conduces to a peaceful state of mind, it cannot by itself take him very far along the path of spiritual unfoldment and realization, which culminates in samadhi. The fact that the progressive practice of Īśvara Praṇidhāna can ultimately lead to samadhi shows definitely that it signifies a much deeper process of transformation in the sadhaka than a mere acceptance of whatever experiences and ordeals come to him in the course of his life. To understand the significance and technique of Īśvara Praṇidhāna, it is necessary to recall how the Purusha gets involved in prakriti through avidya, which results in his becoming subject to illusion and consequent sufferings and miseries of life. As this question has been discussed thoroughly in dealing with the theory of kleshas, it is not necessary to go into it in detail here, but there is one central idea bearing on the problem under consideration, which may be briefly referred to in this connection. According to the philosophy upon which the science of yoga is based, the reality within us is free from the fundamental illusion, which is responsible for the limitation and miseries of our life. The individual consciousness, or Purusha, is a manifestation of that reality. How does he then become subject to the great illusion and the consequent sufferings of the lower life? By the imposition of the I consciousness, which makes him identify himself with his vehicles and with the environment in which his consciousness is immersed. As long as this veil of asmita, or I-ness, covers his true nature, swarupa, he remains bound by the limitations and illusions of life, and the only way in which he can regain his freedom from them is by removing this covering of I consciousness. This is the basic idea underlying the whole philosophy of yoga, and all systems of yoga aim at the destruction of this I consciousness, directly or indirectly, by one means or another. The practice of Īśvara Praṇidhāna is one of such means. It has for its object the dissolution of asmita by the systematic and progressive merging of the individual will with the will of Īśvara, and thus destroying the very root of the kleshas. The practice of Īśvara Praṇidhāna therefore begins with the mental assertion, "Not my will, but thy will be done." But it does not end there. There is a steady effort to bring about a continuous recession of consciousness from the level of the personality, which is the seat of I consciousness, into the consciousness of the Supreme, whose will is working out in the manifest world. This effort may take many forms according to the temperament and previous samskaras of the sadhaka. Samskaras are the impressions that are being projected out, right, and that are playing in manifest reality. There may be an earnest desire to become a conscious instrument of the Supreme Will, which is finding expression in the unfolding of the manifested universe. This will finds obstruction in its expression at the human level owing to the limitations of the personality. The greater the egoism, the greater the obstruction and the consequent obstruction. Such a sadhaka who is trying to practice Īśvara Praṇidhāna tries to remove this obstruction of the personality by doing nishkama karma, so that his personality may become a willing and conscious instrument of the divine will. It is needless to say that this is a gradual process, and for a long time, the sadhaka has to work, as it were, in the dark, trying to do scrupulously what he thinks to be right without having any conscious knowledge of the divine will. It is, however, not necessary to know the divine will until the personality has been brought under control. For even if that will were known, the wayward and uncontrolled personality will not allow it to be expressed freely and fully. It's always going to be intervening and kind of muddling things up, right? Interpreting things wrong, reacting, yeah. But as in all processes of this nature, the effort to realize an ideal gradually removes the obstructions in the way of realization. And if the sadhaka pursues his idea with perseverance, he succeeds in becoming a conscious agent of the divine. His false lower I disappears, and the divine will can work freely through the I-less center of his consciousness. This is real karma yoga. The practice of Īśvara Praṇidhāna takes a different form if the sadhaka is a person with a highly emotional temperament and is treading the path of bhakti. Interesting. Here, the emphasis is not on the merging of the individual will in the divine will, but on the union with the beloved through love. But as love naturally expresses itself in self-abnegation and subordination of personal desires to the will of the beloved, the path of bhakti also leads indirectly to the dissolution of the I, or asmita. Here, it is love which is the driving force and which brings about the destruction of egoism and fusion of consciousness, and samadhi is the result. The careful student will be able to see in Īśvara Praṇidhāna the essence of bhakti yoga. It is thought by many students of the system of yoga outlined in the Yoga Sūtras that there is not much of a place for a bhakti in this system. And bhakti has not been given the weight it deserves considering its importance in spiritual culture. It is true that the manner in which the subject has been dealt with by Patanjali does give that impression, but does not Īśvara Praṇidhāna contain in a nutshell the whole essential technique of bhakti yoga? Navadha bhakti, which comprises the practical side of bhakti yoga, is merely of a preparatory nature, and it is meant to lead the sadhaka to the stage where he is able to recognize, where he is able to renounce all external aids and to surrender himself completely to the will of the Lord and depend upon him completely for everything. Surely, this advanced technique of spiritual culture and ultimate union with the beloved in samadhi is nothing but Īśvara Praṇidhāna. Now that's the end of that sutra. The next one is 33. Vitarka Badhane Pratipaksha Bhavanam. When the mind is disturbed by improper thoughts, constant pondering over the opposites is the remedy. Contrast. Okay, so that one's pretty short. And then 34. So I'll probably do 33 and 34 in the next video.